warm welcome to Inside Asia, a podcast by SEB where we try to make sense and connect the dots of what's going on in Asian economies and financial markets. My name is Sean Yokota, Head of Markets for Asia at SEB. We are recording this pod on April 10 in the afternoon, local time here in Singapore. I am joined by my fellow podcast partner, Fredrik Hahnel, Head of Asia for SEB and General Manager in Singapore. Hi, Fredrik.
Hi, Sean.
It's good to have you again talking. So
Good
today,
to be back.
it's been a while. Today, we are inviting back Juliette Lascoux, the General Manager for SEB Shanghai, to get a sense of what is the thinking inside China as Trump tariffs are rocking the world up and down every single day, especially the stock market. But it seems like Trump is circling the wagon around China as his enemy number one. Hi, Juliette.
Hi, Sean.
It's good to have you back. And usually, when we start this about talking about the recent developments in the Asian markets, but today we'll just jump right into it because the markets are reflecting the topic today on China and Trump's tariffs. So first, let me just kind of give a brief recap of where we are. And it's very important that today I said is April 10th. It's at 2:40-ish Singapore time, because in 1 hour's time, there might be something different Trump is going to be saying. So let me just start where we are now. So as of now, the stock market's hurting. So US S&P, it's down 7% this year. Even from yesterday's huge rally of 10%, we're still down. Shanghai is down 4% year to date. And as of this moment, US is taxing China. It's at 125%, versus it was 20% when Trump took office. So this 105 percentage points of increase has gone through. And so far, China has retaliated by imposing 84% tariff on US goods. But again, by 2-3 hours later, it could have increased to 105%, which was kind of to match what Trump did last night. But it's been a tit for tat. And then on China's side, they're also adding a little things like restricting rare earths exports to certain US places. It's mostly to stop kind of military, tech or green tech development, AI development to the US, things like drones and jets as well. Also, they're stopping some agricultural purchases like sorghum and chicken. But these are kind of the smaller things that they're doing relative to the tariffs. So that's just a brief recap. And so we will kick it over to you, Fredrik, since you were actually in Shanghai and Beijing recently. So what were your impressions over there?
Yeah, I went there for the first time, I think, in a year and a half. So it was great to be back in China. I spent this time a bit longer than I usually do. So I was there 10 days or so. I traveled to Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. So I was in the north, in the middle of the country, and in the south as well. And then mainly met clients, a lot of them together with Juliette. We had a CEO experience sharing dinner in Shanghai. I met with the EU delegation in Beijing. I met with analysts, regulator, old friends in the music business. And I even met my old landlord who I used to rent a house from in Shanghai, who told me about the property market and how he and his wife are trying to get money out of China, but it's very, very difficult. So a lot of different data points and impressions and views of China. And my short conclusion would be that things were better than expected, but they were also worse than expected. It really depends on what part of the economy you look at. I think when I say better than expected, if you compare it to a lot of the media reports in the West and a lot of the way that the US leadership tries to portray China as on the verge of collapse, it's out of control. It's going to be financial crisis, property crisis. People just want to get out. Is quite misplaced. It's considerably better than that. I think I don't see any such risks short term. At the same time, when I say it's worse than expected, I refer to I think the sentiment, and in particular in the consumption part of the economy where it's quite recessionary. You feel it, you see it in restaurants, especially high-end restaurants that are it's very easy to get a table, by the way, in Beijing and Shanghai these days, while kind of lower end restaurants are quite crowded. So you can see a kind of downgrading of consumption to cheaper, uh, cheaper consumption. You hear very different stories between companies. Some are quite optimistic about the future. If they are, remember, I was there and meeting clients before the trade war broke out. So things, of course, changed a lot. But in general, those who were kind of exposed to the export sector or to Chinese companies going global tended to be, in general, many of them quite positive, and some of them even investing quite a lot in China continuously. While, of course, others that were more exposed to the local economy were less optimistic. We also had a lot of discussions on kind of de-risking and moving out of China. That seems to be quite much more difficult than many companies expected. They're trying to move supply chain out of China, but a lot of these supply chains, once they move to other countries, it's actually Chinese companies that are there supplying them as well. So that was also quite an interesting theme. There's so much more to say, but I think I stop there and then we just start listening to Juliette instead.
Yeah, let's bring Juliette into this conversation. So the first thing we want to get is what's been the initial reaction in China to the bump in the Trump tariffs, whether it's public reaction from companies or anything anecdotal or rumors that you're hearing.
Yeah, so if I just look back at this week that has passed, I think a few observations is that number one is that the first reaction is actually disappointment. That when on the 2nd of April, when Trump announced the tariff rates, I think it was worse than feared. I think many were prepared for a trade war, but when the first round came out, it was still the worst possible trade war. So disappointment, first reaction, and then it quickly went into disillusion because in the subsequent daily escalation that we have all seen, right? So people are, now I'm talking about ordinary people on the street as well as more enlightened or educated people belong to the so-called elite class. I think quite broadly, Chinese people are disillusioned. Since earlier on, there were quite some people in China hoped for a deal-making, transactional, business-friendly Donald Trump, right? And it turns out not to be so in this very case. But then I do reflect also that now a week has passed and a lot of things have happened in this week. I think people have rallied around the Chinese leadership for the so-called fighting to the end. And I think sentiment has swinged also because now it looks more like the trade war is actually a anti-China only trade war. So I think there is a quite strong feeling that there is a Chinese people are more united, if you want, at this point of time behind the government's narrative of fighting to the bitter end. So it's pretty emotional on the people side. On the business side, I would say that, well, I met mostly multinational companies in China. I do not meet state-owned companies and large privately owned companies, so it has its limitation. But from a multinational company's point of view, it's almost like a feeling of unrealness that business cannot possibly bear that. Therefore, it is like pausing business decisions for the moment. People are analyzing, people are waiting for things to fall to its place. And it seems that people do not believe yet that this is the end, that we shall still wait and see. So there is a wait and see. There is a calculating, analyzing going on right now. But obviously, business dislike the whole situation, of course. Yeah. So that's all what we could see, or what I could see so far.
It looks like the sentiment at the beginning, we were talking like, you mentioned like Trump, is he going to be a transactional deal maker or kind of this full decoupling phase that we're going through? And it seems like we're more moving towards decoupling. But like from what I hear from you, it looks like the companies still think that there is a hope and decoupling isn't the path to go. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is a vague hope that this is not real because it cannot be real. And you cannot have a tariff. Tariff goes beyond a certain, let's say 50, 60%. A lot of companies say so. Cease to make sense. So you can't, no matter it's 125 or 225, it will mean no business. Companies will pause business, basically. So I think maybe it will be at that level, but I think companies still have some kind of hope that things will change. Is a little bit, but again, this is from multinational companies in China.
And then it's a little bit split where if you are an exporting company, then you're in this situation of unbelievability of what's happening. But I guess if you're selling to a domestic China demand, then those people are a bit more optimistic.
Yeah, I think those people will not be hit right away by the tariff per se, but I think everyone believes that the tariffs at this level and a forced decoupling in the hard way will certainly hit Chinese economy. And in a much worse economic state, everybody would suffer. So I think that is also ultimately what companies believe. Now, if you're looking at the export companies, I also hear anecdotal sort of stories from the people that for very small companies exporting to China, they still remain optimistic and believe that they could take that through their own margins, which either they have an unbelievably high margin or they are willing to suffer a unbelievably low profitability. But you should never underestimate Chinese people's willingness to, in a short time, withstand the hardship.
And then just kind of coming back to the domestic side of selling to the Chinese consumer. So are there actions taken by the Chinese government to help offset some of these tariff pains? Maybe they're trying to help consumption or maybe try to get the real estate market going again to get some growth back?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question indeed. I think since already December last year, and then followed by the so-called twin sessions in March, I think, Sean, you certainly still remember, there have been very strong signals from the Chinese government that China must shift its growth model from away from export-oriented infrastructure investment to more domestic consumption. So I think there are two theories. One is that, that's what the Chinese government believes. And the second is that, that's the government preparing for the trade war. But no matter which one, the signal was very, very clear. But if you look at exactly what has come out so far, it has been so far trying to create a benign condition for Chinese people to consume, right? No matter whether it is through vouchers or it is through the much anticipated child subsidy, one-off, of course. All those seem not to be strong enough and not to be good enough to convince the broader mass in China that it's time to consume. Because I think the one fundamental worry Chinese people have is employment security and future income, right? So if you look at some statistics, I don't know, Sean, you know that certainly better than I, that it says that 60% of Chinese household income comes from salary, 8% comes from property income, and then there's some business income for 16%. So obviously, if you do not have a very firm belief in your salary income or you see actual salary increase, it will be difficult for you to consume. I mean, Frederick, I don't know, you met a lot of people also. You even know some really rich people. What's your take on that?
He only talks to rich people.
Yeah,
I'm,
he
I'm
only
not sure.
talks to rich people. I don't know
I,
any rich.
I think the only rich people I met were my ex landlords actually. But yeah, no, but but I think that I agree with what you're saying, and I think that employment security, I agree with you, it's a very big part here, where clearly unemployment is going up in China, and you do start to see also foreign companies laying off people. But I think also, of course, it's been 4 years of falling property prices. And I felt that people don't see any end to this at the moment still, even though China has tried to, in certain ways, stabilize the market. But that, I think, has to happen. I think the property market has to be stabilized for sentiment to return to a little bit more positive territory in China. But one thing I'm thinking as well is that if you look back, or if you look at the Chinese economy, of course, like any other economy, it's driven by three things, mainly investments, exports, and consumption. And for the past couple of years, because of China's situation, it has overcapacity, it has in many areas overinvested, and consumption has been quite weak. It's been very dependent on the exports to drive the economic growth in China. And so I think this trade war comes at a very, very sensitive time for China. Everyone is waiting for stimulative policies to stimulate consumption in China. Definitely, it will come, but one should also remember that China has already stimulated quite a lot, and China's fiscal deficit, the way IMF and other observers calculate it, is roughly around 10% or even more. So China has already stimulated a lot. China already has a very, very big fiscal deficit, and hence there are also limits to how much it can spend. The same goes for infrastructure. China definitely needs more infrastructure over time, but it has already invested quite a lot in railways, in airports, in roads, etc. So the kind of marginal return on further investments in the economy is also diminishing. So it's quite a difficult time. So I agree with Juliette. People are kind of sympathizing with, I think, with the leadership in Beijing now, that this is a difficult situation. It's quite obvious to a lot of Chinese that America is trying to corner China, and they feel that China is the ultimate, kind of goal of this trade war going on. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how this develops when things get tougher in China. Chinese people always talk about, as we said when we had a pre-talk to this pod today, that they're saying that 中国人能吃苦, Chinese people are able to eat bitterness. And I think that, of course, is true. Chinese people are ready for some tough times. But of course, the question is how tough times and how long will it go on? I would say that a lot of people probably feel that short term we're going to have to suffer more than many other countries. But medium term, one should also remember, and this I saw in several discussion programs in China with economists and analysts, saying that there will also, of course, also be opportunities in this as the US steps back from the global arena in different ways. So I wouldn't rule out that over a number of years, a little bit more longer term, that there will also be opportunities for China to strengthen its position in the world.
Yeah, that I think definitely is what many people sort of hope for. I mean, the long run aspect, right? But I think also, if you want to look at there are many different Chinese people when we talk about Chinese people. Now, there are also Chinese people who are quite optimistic and convinced that China has the capacity to hit back the way it already did. What has emboldened the government is that China has prepared for this for the past 6 years since the first round of trade war, right? So some analysts, and now I'm talking about Chinese analysts, provide the statistics saying, well, if you look at how much percentage of Chinese GDP is dependent on export to the US, that's only 3%, right? So so only 20% of Chinese GDP is export generated, and only 15% of the export goes to the US. So you have that sort of a simple calculation. And then, well, given that, China probably could withstand a total stop of Sino-US trade, goods trade or service trade for that matter. So I think that is also one aspect. When it comes to real estate, I think everyone agrees that this is definitely would have been a more significant stimulus to consumption. And everyone agrees on that. But everyone also agrees that it's more risky for the government to go along that path because the government said it will not. And long-term wise, there is a conflict there where while Chinese government has been very clear on that the future growth of China lies in high technological manufacturing, new productive forces, right? So China doesn't sound 100% convinced itself of a consumption economy model a la United States. One of the most widespread social media posts today and yesterday was, as you probably have seen also, that China wants to be what wants to shift to a consumption model like the US, and the US wants to shift to a production manufacturing model like China. Everyone wants to be the other one. So is China really convinced of the consumption model? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's from what you're saying, then it looks like this bazooka that people have been waiting for to boost consumption in China doesn't look like it's really going to happen. And also, like you said from the other parts, that it is related to your income as well. So if your income isn't really growing, it's hard to get a consumption growing as well. So kind of along those income lines, you touched a little bit upon it, Frederick, too, on employment, because as long as you have jobs, you're going to have income and then you can consume. But like Frederick, you mentioned that at least some maybe international companies may have started to reduce some employment. Do you feel that happening already, or is it a little bit too early for that? People start to lose jobs, and maybe they get upset about the impact of the tariffs, and maybe they have to go to the negotiation table.
If I start, definitely it's happening. Anecdotal wise, all the time. I went to buy my lunch today and overheard people in the queue that HSBC is laying off. It goes like, my friend is being laid off by HSBC now. Well, but anyway, foreign companies treat their employees really well. So she would get M+2 or M+3 all the time, all the time. So I do think it's a fact that companies are laying off. And if you are laid off by multinational companies, you still can get some compensation. But when small Chinese export-oriented companies are laying off, I'm not quite sure which conditions they would provide, because they are known to have worse conditions than multinational companies. So I think that's a major hurdle to consumption.
Among my friends who are small entrepreneurs in China, they are bleeding. It's very, very, very difficult for them, and they have laid off a lot of people, many of them, in some cases, almost everyone except themselves and the very closest employees. So there I could definitely see it. Yes, you hear about it among foreign companies, but they're usually trying to keep it quite low key, right? And it's not that, we shouldn't exaggerate either. We met with a lot of clients, you and I, Juliette, and there were not any of them who talked about cutting down at this point, at least. But again, it was before trade war and everything. But of course, and I think there's also a lot of pressure on Chinese companies, in particular the state-owned, to not lay off people, even if business has, even if profitability has come down somewhat in China. So there are many aspects of that. I think another one that's not related to maybe the employment situation, but still to China's ability to weather this trade war, is of course that China doesn't have any inflation. China hasn't had any real inflation for the past number of years since COVID broke out, and that's quite obvious when you visit China now. It's cheap. It's very, very cheap to go out and eat and drink and buy things. And so, of course, I think a little bit of the I think calculation here from the Chinese leadership might be also that we can weather this from that point of view, even though this comes at a very, very sensitive time for us and for our economy and the sentiment. But on the other hand, we will not have a problem of inflation, and let's see how this plays out for the U.S. If this is inflationary for the American economy, that they will be sensitive too, right? With the inflation situation they have already, and since they import a lot from China, that will now be twice as expensive. That import will, of course, go down dramatically going forward. But they've also added tariffs on other countries, even though they have taken away the most severe ones. So that will also be an interesting thing to watch out for going forward.
And Juliette, do you see that the deflationary forces? Your lunch is getting cheaper.
Yeah, I think people are consuming down. And as I said yesterday, I met someone who jokingly said that, well, we are not even ashamed today now to go to that cheaper coffee shop chain, which charges half the price as Starbucks. Before, in the good times, we wouldn't want to do that in front of other people because of the loss of prestige, right? So just the anecdote. But definitely people are consuming downwards. And Chinese people already, before this happened, has a propensity to save, for reasons we have talked a lot about, structure, all that, right? But so I think it is definitely true that people are consuming down. You see a lot of people traveling, domestic travel have certainly not decreased. The foreign travels have decreased, but people are spending less, even though they are out traveling. That we see also from statistics.
And one thing that I noticed, Juliette, when I was there now, because if I compare to, I lived in Shanghai for many years, but left 10 years ago, as you know. If I look back on a couple of big changes now, is that a lot of the foreigners are not there anymore. I heard when I was in Shanghai that 2/3 of the foreigners living in Shanghai have left, and that was very obvious to me when I was there. And then I also feel when you say that people are traveling more domestically and sort of downtrend their consumption. One thing that struck me when I was there is that there's so many more Chinese brands. When you go to shops and you go to department stores, etc., in China today, you see many of the big restaurant chains. They're cutting back. They don't have that many outlets anymore. You see, if you go into a department store in China, you see fantastic, fancy car dealers. They're all selling Chinese cars, or almost all of them. I mean, you should remember, out of the 10 top selling car models in China today, only one is foreign. That's Tesla, with I think a 7% market share. So you see the BYDs and Leo Autos, and you see Geely and the others. And even when you go, and when you go buy mobile phones, you will see Chinese brands primarily, or smartphones, you will see Chinese brands. And even when you go to buy, I just went to buy some snacks. I realized there were many new kinds of chips and stuff that I had not seen before that were actually local Chinese brands. So it's just an interesting observation. And I think one thing that struck me when I was there as well on the subject is that I think a lot of people in China feel that their old business model, or the way they had positioned themselves, will not work anymore. That they have to change. So a lot of companies that used to be very successful industrial companies with one kind of product, selling to one segment in China, they see now that their market is falling in China. And I think a lot of people who have been positioned for certain kind of jobs will simply have to change. China will not grow in that kind of manufacturing export sector to the same extent anymore. But instead, there are many other industries that are going to grow fast. And we know the ones such as the AI industry of China, or IT in general, or the anything that's related to the energy transition, etc., batteries and solar panels and whatnot. So that's quite interesting as well, to see how this is going to be painful process and change for the economy. But there are also, one should remember, many sectors in China that are growing. So
Yeah, that I certainly agree. I think the upcoming of Chinese brands are driven by, number one is some of them offer more value for money. Some of them, I think, simply better products, and that goes for EVs, for instance. And then the third is that the Chinese consumers, the ones which previously bought Western luxury brands for the sake of prestige, the proportion of that sort of consumers are smaller now, and that ties back to, you consume downwards. You would like to have more value for money rather than spending money on prestige, right? So I think that goes for it, and as it goes, it will probably be even more so in the short coming future if you don't see your income tenfolds in the coming 5 years.
Yeah, so like Japan's the king of deflation, and during deflation, all these cheap shops like Don Quixote or like Daiso, all these places start to do really well because they're offering very cheap things. I think even like Uniqlo it couldn't have succeeded without deflation. So there are opportunities in these environments as well. But one thing I want to just ask, you guys both mentioned about electric vehicles, and that kind of takes you to, okay, China's the powerhouse in manufacturing. They can't export to the US. Looks like Europe is a good destination, but there's been tensions forming around that. Um, what do you think that's going to happen? Do you think they'll work together, Europe and China, or that's a no go?
Yeah, I don't think it's digital. I don't think that Europe can just wholeheartedly embrace China 100%. I think Europe does not want to decouple for China. For that, Europe has been pretty clear that they want to have this option of continue having certain economic interaction with China. But I think Europe is equally afraid as US about huge quantity of Chinese cheap goods flowing into Europe. And I think if China plays this card smartly, they shouldn't allow that to happen. So I think China and Europe will need to make an agreement on how to trade with each other, and each acts respectfully. And then I think there is another dimension, is that on the ideological ground, political system-wise, culture-wise, Europe is closer to the United States. Therefore, it is difficult for Europe to change side or choose side, right? I think I went to an event and some European companies talked freely with Chinese employees at European companies, saying, well, China's position in the Russia-Ukraine war has been a problem for Europe, right? So it is very, very clear obstacle. So nowadays, that one can not easily be just discarded. Just an example of that. And I think this said, we heard rumors in the market that the Spanish Prime Minister or some other European leaders are either already contacting Chinese government or on their way to visit China. That I think will happen. That's for sure. But then let's see what happens, because every single day something happens, and that may change the picture. I don't know, Fredrik, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm a little bit less optimistic than usual when it comes to this. I think that, well, first of all, we saw that Ursula von der Leyen reached out to Li Chang the other day, right, to discuss. So Europe is clearly prepared for this and keen to keep a dialogue open with China. But I think that even in a really, really good scenario where both China and Europe are very keen to keep the relation going, I still think it's going to be very, very challenging, simply for the fact that China has become so incredibly good at so many things, at manufacturing so many things cheaply and well, and that the competition from China will just get worse. As you say, there's a risk that Chinese companies will start dump products in Europe. I had a meeting with a senior representative of the European delegation in Beijing when I was there, and we talked about this. And I said to him, why don't you just do exactly what China did in the 80s and 90s when I started traveling to China? You just put a lot of requirements on Chinese companies to manufacture in Europe, employ people, move R&D to Europe, and require European content into your products if you want to sell in the European Union. That's exactly how China did it in the beginning, and you had a lot of knowledge transfer and create a lot of employment as well at that time. But he said that yes, we are discussing such things, but it is very difficult for the European Union because we are 27 members, and there are certain members that don't always agree. Some of them we can guess that are very keen to get Chinese investments on their own terms and are not ready to put such requirements on China. So that's, I think, one challenge that Europe has, that we're not fast. The US is really, really fast. The only thing we've done basically so far is to add tariffs on EVs into Europe, but that's, we should remember, quite a small part of China's total exports to Europe. And I see how a lot of other industries will also be struggling with Chinese competition. Now we've seen the car industry, right? We have seen also the solar panel industry already be completely outcompeted by Chinese. But there are so many other examples. You and I, Juliette, when we were in Europe together a few months ago, we met with a European crane manufacturer that's working with ship-to-shore cranes, and they talked about how incredibly competitive Chinese competitors are, and how the margin pressure has been quite brutal, and a lot of foreign companies have given up. You can see it in the shipping industry, that has also been discussed in this trade war with the US, right? The US are suggesting certain penalty fees for Chinese ships or Chinese-owned ships to dock American ports. But if you look at the statistics, I had a meeting just before this pod with one of the shipping companies here in Singapore. And today, you look on the world fleet of cargo ships, way over 50% today are Chinese. And when this company bought new ships during 2024, over 80% of all the ships that they purchased were Chinese ships. And China has moved from quite basic ships up to now doing LNG ships. And they have also, in the past few years, also started producing cruiser ships. which is something that historically, Germany, Italy, France, and Finland have been very strong in. So that's just another example. I'll give one more example because I think it's both going to be difficult with Chinese competition in Europe, but we're also seeing more and more Chinese competition on the global markets elsewhere. And I had a lunch with a European bus manufacturer recently here in Singapore, and we were talking about when Singapore on a yearly basis buys buses for their bus fleet to upgrade it. And they said a number of years ago, just a few years ago actually, typically when there was such a tender, there would be 5 companies coming in with offers, and they would be quite strongly positioned, and they would usually have a pretty good chance to win. But in the last few years, this number has grown from 5 to I think it was 19 new or 18 or so companies that are now bidding for this tender. And the difference between these 5 and let's say it was 18, the 30 new ones are all Chinese, and they are coming with very, very cost-efficient solutions, etc. So I think that we are up for some very, very tough times. Even if we play this well and we try to do this maturely rather than immaturely that certain other countries are doing it at the moment, I still think that we would be up for quite significant challenges in Europe's relation with China.
Yeah, so it does sound like that the hope cannot be pinned on continued export, right? So that is why that goes back to why the Chinese government is talking right now only about domestic consumption, that finally the economy has to change its model, so to say, that they haven't spoken about exporting to Europe instead, but they did talk these 2 days about exploring and expanding trade partnerships with other countries. So they did talk about it, but they talk even more about domestic consumption. I think the president himself last December even lifted this item as a national security priority. That is to say, get the domestic consumption up, which is the strongest ever word he used for domestic consumption.
When these tensions increases, it's always hard to control how much it goes. But with these U.S. tensions, are you seeing, Juliette, people boycotting U.S. products on their own?
No, I haven't seen people boycotting US products on their own, but I wouldn't be surprised if the situation continues this way and continuously escalating. It might be so, because what has been very different this time is that when you talk to educated class, people who have been educated in the United States, work for United States companies, American companies or multinational companies, if you see what they post things which are either mocking the United States or getting quite close to the narrative of the Chinese government. This is really something new, because this class usually doesn't do that sort of thing. So I do think this time the US has succeeded in rallying Chinese people around its own leadership, unfortunately. And Chinese government today issued warning for Chinese citizens traveling to the United States or Chinese students studying in the United States. You do have even on the culture side and all that a ongoing campaign or a narrative being established. So boycott not yet, but I do hear Chinese people saying, in my life I cannot see anything from the United States that I must have. That everything imported from the US, I can find easily a substitute. That I hear from educated Chinese people. Maybe not chips, though. I don't know. They don't think that way. Not on consumer goods.
Yeah. No, I think that's kind of it's a really good insight from onshore China, because it's not something that's, I think with less journalists in China as well, you don't hear as much on what's happening on the ground. So these things are extremely good to follow, because the problem is once you get many more people on your side, it could become also harder to control for the party as well when these protests gets too big, which kind of has happened in the past. So it's good to see how this develops.
Right. One thing is pretty sure is that if mass unemployment kicks in, I think the Chinese government will have no problem convincing its people that it is the United States that makes you unemployed. I think the narrative is already there.
And then, but I was thinking that we're not there yet, so that's why there's not much to negotiate. But maybe once you get to those points, then that's when the President Xi may want to start talking to Trump. So since we're not there yet, I think it's a little too early to call this a victory. Okay, I think we can go on forever on this topic. So in the interest of time, we'll try to wrap it around here. And of course, even in 2 hours' time, the world could be very different. So we can redo another podcast in a couple weeks as the world is changing to keep up. So yes, Juliette, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your views of what's happening in Shanghai.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Fredrik, thanks as usual for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you for hosting it, Sean.
Finally, thanks everyone for listening to Inside Asia. See you again soon.